Hey, in today's RTFSC, I want to talk about Tebako. All right, so what is Tebako? This is kind of an interesting use case for Ruby. Typically, when people talk about Ruby, it's building a Rails web application, something like that. But what this is about is you're going to write a program using Ruby. In my case, I actually used it to write a command line application that I need to distribute to people who don't have Ruby installed. They're going to be running platforms like macOS, Linux, even Windows. And so the way that I do that is I use Tebako. And like generally how Tebako works, you have your Ruby scripts, obviously that you write, this proprietary program, and then you have gems, and those are also written in Ruby. And then you have your Ruby runtime. So in my case, I'm using Ruby 3.2, I believe, for terminal wire. So what Tebako does is it takes all of those things and it packages those things up into this thing that looks like an executable to these different platforms. So on macOS, if I distribute a Tebako binary, users just run it, and they have no idea that there's Ruby running under there. If you're thinking these are going to be like huge bloated binary files as a result of the build process, you would be dead wrong. The distribution that I made for terminal wire, which you should check this out. If you want to add a terminal UI to your SaaS, this is this drop-in thing where if you have a Rails application, you can run bundle add terminal wire Rails, and it's actually going to run the command line on your server, and I stream that thing to terminal wire. So think about like, hey, your terminal app is running on your server. That way you don't have to like distribute this installed software. And terminal wire does that for you. So put this thing in your server, streams it to this thin client that I developed, and I use Tebako to package that thing. And that client is actually hanging out at GitHub terminal wire Ruby. So if you go here, you can actually see my implementation of this thing that uses Tebako. And that's how I can distribute this thing to Linux and macOS users. I don't have Windows yet, but I can, and Tebako, I believe, is capable of doing that. But anyway, I run this terminal application and distribute this thing for you so that you don't have to. All right, so let's see, we're 2.5 minutes into this thing, so let's go ahead and clone the source code on this and see if we can make sense of it. So let me open my command line here, clone. This is a preview into what I'll do for the next RTFSC Traveling Ruby, which we'll get to later. I'm going to pause this because I don't want to have to watch you, or I don't want you to have to watch me pull this. All right, so we have the source for Tebako. So let's go ahead and crack the README open here, and we'll see. So this does support all platforms. Have Ubuntu, Alpine, macOS, Windows, AMD 64. I found this a very just enjoyable project to use. Like there were parts of it that weren't straightforward, but I was able to get those issues resolved and contribute to some of the documentation. So the maintainers of this are very responsive, and they're also just like very curious about like, well, how are you using this? What are you using it for? How can we improve it? So that was quite nice. A lot of this stuff's over my head. Like, to be honest, I don't work with GCC or G++ a lot. So like it worked for the most part. There is a rake file. I think this is for tests and whatnot. There's a Tebako gem spec. So there actually is like a command that you run, Tebako press. And let's see if we can find press. And the way this works is you run this Tebako press command against against a project. So if let's say you develop a Ruby gem and you have a binary for it, and you don't want to have the user to have to install macOS or Windows, you can just say Tebako press and then give it the folder for your gem source, and it will find your binaries and everything and just mount those. And that's called the entry point is like, hey, this is the thing you're going to be running. And then you can specify the Ruby version, so you can distribute Ruby 3.2, 3.4, whatever it is. There's a lot of options here. The documentation is pretty good. The part that was weird for me is I found if I run Tebako press against a Ruby gem versus like if I run Tebako press against just a random Ruby script that I have hanging around, I actually found that it was kind of tricky to understand what it was doing, because it would actually look at the directory structure, and that command would run slightly differently depending on the directory structure. That wasn't insurmountable. I don't know if that was fixed or not. Actually, I haven't checked in on this project in a while, but I found myself wanting to just be like saying strictly, hey, I just want to run against this file. It's always going to be a Ruby script. It's always going to behave the same way. It doesn't matter what the directory structure is. So in that sense, I think it was like a bit too clever, but it's fine. I still think this is a pretty great project. These are the binaries that you're going to be running. So there's Tebako CLI, and let's go ahead and open that up in libtebako. A lot of this stuff is actually going to be like shelling out. So here we are. We're using Thor to kind of run this whole command line application. This is a command line parser if you're not familiar with it. You pass it these parameters. It's just looking for like, hey, where are my Ruby source files? And all those things that we talked about. Press is what actually you run and you say like, hey, Tebako press. That means I want to take all this stuff and package it. You're like pressing this package. And then at the other side of that, you get a binary. Now here's the thing. If you want to compile a Linux binary, you would have to run this command on a Linux machine. If you want to create a macOS binary, you'd have to run this command on a macOS machine. Same thing for Windows. It's not like Go or some of these other languages where you can, say for macOS, compile a Windows binary or compile a Linux binary. It doesn't work that way. So one of the trade-offs here, if you are distributing binaries, you can use Ruby, but just keep in mind you're going to have to like run your Linux compilations on Linux and macOS, so you may need CI for that. What I found to be the most challenging thing to build is actually like macOS Intel binaries, because like GitHub CI does not have macOS Intel. They do have Linux ARM and they have Linux Intel. So there's a few kind of things you're going to have to think about if you're going into this. You're going to have I think a harder time finding like macOS Intel, but it's not insurmountable. I actually just ended up pulling out an old MacBook Pro, installed macOS on it, and I just had that thing plugged into my basement as part of like my CI grid for terminal wire. All right, so there's press. Let's see what packager is. I forget if this thing, you can see a lot of files here. It actually does patch some files, I think, because it has to like patch some of the paths for whenever this thing boots. It needs to understand like, oh, actually I'm not running on the actual machine per se. I'm like running inside of this thing, this package. I don't want to call it a container. It's not like a container like Docker or anything like that. It's actually running Ruby on your machine, but there's some patches that it has to do. So Ruby Builder, I think this is the thing where, you're running make, passing it the cores, make install, make Ruby. So this thing is compiling Ruby. It's interesting there's packager light. I'm not sure what this thing does, but you can see a lot of this is just like Ruby's script that's moving files around and compiling things. Let's see what else we got. Build helpers, packager. Yeah, here's the patches. The patches are kind of interesting to look at, like popen. There's some platform specific things it has to worry about. What was nice, I didn't have to like jump too deeply into this. For the most part, things just worked. What I remember is the initial compilation took a while, which it does. The docs tell you that. Like you have to compile everything, and it caches a lot of that. So the second time you build it, it's fine. And like I said before, the problems that I ran into with this were just mostly around understanding if I run Tebako press against a Ruby gem versus a folder. And I think I was running into problems where I have, for terminal wire, it's like a if you look at the repo, it's multiple gems in a file. So you can see here I have gem, and then I have multiple gems in here. And I'm running the binary out of terminal wire, and then I'm running out of terminal wire core and client, a lot of the pieces that I need. So the issue I ran into is that when I did this compilation, I didn't want to release these gems. So I wanted a way to say, hey, Tebako, here's like paths to all these gems that I have. Can you go ahead and package these things up? I need to try that again because I'm like kind of hazy on how the packaging for that works. But again, overall, I'm not complaining about Tebako. I'm pretty happy with it. Again, it's very well maintained. You can see here that the most recent releases were last week. Don't let this number scare you. It's overall pretty good. I would say, like, if you want to quickly get a terminal application for your SaaS, maybe you're building a dev tool, or there's just like a part of your application where you need people to upload huge files, check out TerminalWire. You can be up and running with a terminal in Rails in like under 5 minutes. You'll have Hello World, and then you can iterate quickly on that. Check it out.